It's my nerd world. What's going on? Welcome to it, Depeche Mode, the podcast. This week on the show, essentially you get to be the host. I have a lot of listener feedback to get to. Plus, we're going to talk fashion. Fast fashion? See what I did there? No, we're going to talk fashion, and I'll explain once we get started. Thank you so much for checking out Depeche Mode, the podcast this week. Let's get to it.
Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
Welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Glad you are with another episode of Depeche Mode, the podcast. As always, you can email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at @TheMyNerdWorld, Instagram at @TheMyNerdWorld, also TheJonJustice on Instagram. I have a TikTok, which is TheJonJustice as well. I think that about covers it. Facebook, you can find me there as well, Jon, Jon Justice. There is not a lot of news. As a matter of fact, there's no news to get to this week. We still don't have a release date for the Ghosts Again single, although there was rumors going around that perhaps the single would drop on the 21st. So I'm recording this on Thursday. That would be tomorrow. I will be completely honest with you. I have not gone to my iTunes app to see if anything new has been posted. You can watch the Ghosts Again Vinegar Hill session. Music video is available there, along with Ghosts Again on the app. But in terms of singles, still no single for Ghosts Again. And as I mentioned in previous episodes, we know that they have remixes and even potentially a produced version of the cover they did for the BBC piano session of Sundown, which I'd be interested to hear, obviously, because I wasn't. Compared to the other songs they did during the piano room. I said piano session, didn't I? Piano room, the BBC piano room. I thought that their material was better than the cover of A Sundown, but I would be very interested to hear a produced version of it. So perhaps there will be more to talk about, and I'll drop another episode tomorrow if we do happen to get the remixes for Ghosts Again in an official single release. I will say that it kind of sucks that I got to find out by going into my app. I miss those days, and I know they are long gone for the most part. Well, they're long gone, unless you're searching for older Depeche Mode. But I miss those days of going physically out to a record store to get my music, especially when it comes to Depeche Mode. I watched and it's definitely worth a watch, especially if you are of a certain generation, which would be mine, being that I'm 50. Hate saying that out loud. But there's a documentary directed by Colin Hanks, Tom Hanks' son, on the history of Tower Records, and it really, really is fascinating. I would definitely go and check it out. It's available on Amazon Prime, so I watched that last week, and while I would have liked more time spent during those late 80s, early 90s period, which was the time when I was going to Tower Records most often, it still is a fascinating documentary chronicling the rise and subsequent fall, and again bringing me to my bemoaning of having to go into my iTunes app to see if there's new Depeche Mode. So I definitely would go and check that out. But that whole process was just part of the experience of being a Depeche Mode fan. Before we get into the listener feedback this week, I just had a couple of things that I wanted to bring up, and it kind of aligns with that nostalgic time and that era back then of the mid to late 80s into early 90s, during that, incredibly special, magical time period of being a Depeche Mode fan. And I thought a little bit about this on the drive home from doing my weekly radio show, and I watched Pump Up the Volume, recently. I actually own a DVD copy of it, even though right now it's really, really hard to find. There's been some commentary around that movie because there's so much music in it that in terms of the rights to the songs and being able to put it up on a streaming platform, there's so many various tracks that are played and such older songs that to get the rights in order to put it on a streaming platform is almost impossible. And you can't go and change the music in that movie. But that movie landed and in that magical time period that I talk about so often on the show. And I know for a lot of you, because you've told me, that time being a Depeche Mode fan from, Some Great Reward, Black Celebration, and then definitely getting into music for the masses, Violator, at their peak of popularity, Songs of Faith and Devotion, it was kind of Depeche Mode and then everything else underneath it. And so other things that happened for me personally in my life, it fell under that sort of pyramid. It was Depeche Mode and then everything else. So a movie like Pump Up the Volume, while it doesn't have any Depeche Mode in it, it still fell into that time period where my life was, obsessed with and surrounded by Depeche Mode. And so it has that connection for me. So thinking about that movie, and I've heard some commentary as of late on the Rewatchables podcast, Bill Simmons' podcast. Fantastic podcast, by the way. If you're a movie fan, got to listen to Rewatchables. Go in and seek it out. They did a podcast on Pump Up the Volume, and I did a re-listen to the Rewatchable podcast on it recently when I rewatched the movie. And they made a comment that movie was essentially podcasting before podcasting became a thing. Christian Slater playing a high schooler who has a pirate radio show speaking out to these, to this disenfranchised youth at the time, much in the same way that we get podcasts today. And it got me thinking that Depeche Mode kind of did that. In a different way, a lot of bands do this, but we're talking about Depeche Mode because they're the best. Right, Matt? But in a way, in terms of reaching out and connecting with people, that is part of what made Depeche Mode so special. It wasn't conventional in terms of topics and things like that, and an individual sitting down behind a microphone and discussing issues of the day, expressing feelings and emotions that the individual listening also has. Depeche Mode did it through their music and did it through this amazing songwriting of Martin Gore and, of course, later with Dave Gahan. And, that brings me full circle back around to Memento Mori and how special this time has been with this particular album, how popular this album is, and how the band, even all these years later, still has the ability to connect with us on that level. So it's not a great correlation. Don't misunderstand. I know. As I was driving home today, thinking about sitting down and doing the podcast, that thought popped into my mind that connection that Depeche Mode has made, especially during those years and still does, is a lot like the connection that gets made through podcasting today, and certainly through that movie Pump Up the Volume and Christian Slater and his pirate radio show. So again, just something that kind of popped into my head on the drive home as I continue to listen to almost exclusively Memento Mori. I listened to a few other things. I was turned on from my friend Matt, who I've mentioned on the show, to the latest Everything But the Girl release, and I'm not familiar with their music at all, but this new album is really good, and so I was happy to find some other new music, but I still find myself listening to Memento Mori more than I am anything else, and at least the whole album once a day through the course of just doing various things in my life. So switching gears to one other topic, which is probably more interesting than this 9-minute rant I just went on. I want to talk about, what are you wearing to the shows now? I know this may sound silly, but I've actually been thinking quite a bit about this. Going to see the show in November, and we'll get to that with the listener feedback. Several of you commented on, shared your thoughts on what you think might change, whether it's the set list, or the actual stage itself. And I'll get back to that bonus podcast I did last week of a potential to launch a campaign to have the band play more of Memento Mori live, and they may actually do that based off of some rumors that I've heard. But I'm wondering, what are you wearing now to go see Depeche Mode? Because I remember back when I was seeing the band the most during those years that I just mentioned, when they were touring almost, every year, every other year, and they were doing, longer tours and staying in cities for a longer period of time, especially growing up in Southern California. I remember that we used to almost exclusively wear Depeche Mode shirts to Depeche Mode shows, and it was almost a badge of honor that if you had a T-shirt from a previous tour, that was your street cred, especially if you saw somebody like going to see the devotional tour, somebody seeing a Black Celebration T-shirt and knowing it was an official Black Celebration T-shirt, it was like, whoa. A Violator T-shirt at a Songs of Faith or on a devotional tour was, as cool. But if you're wearing a Black Celebration one or one even before that, I mean, you really were displaying your Depeche Mode cred. But we've kind of moved on from that. So I'm wondering now, what are we wearing to Depeche Mode shows? And again, I know that sounds strange, but I was trying to think back to what I've worn over the course of the past few tours. And I know that when I went to the Sounds of the Universe tour, I went in all black. My cred was that I was wearing the buttons that came with the box set for Sounds of the Universe, of which I'm missing right now, which I'm very annoyed by. I do not know where they are, and that ticks me off. I pulled the box set out recently and was kind of going through everything in it. It's an amazing box set, by the way, for those that don't have it. It's really one of their best. There's so much in that box set. And I am one to keep everything in one place, and those buttons were not there. The pin was not there, so I was very annoyed by that. I had to kind of move off of it, or else I was going to go for a hunt, and I'm honestly not sure where I would have found them. So I'm not sure what I've worn. Certainly not to Spirit. I want to say it might have been. I might have worn my Delta Machine T-shirt, but I'm not sure. So I'm curious, what are you wearing when you go to the shows now? Because I think we've moved off of wearing the concert T-shirts to the shows, at least based off what I've seen from the footage of the crowds at the concerts. Are you getting dressed up? I do remember that when I went to meet the band, I remember this specifically. When I went to meet the band for the K-Rock promotion for the Ultra launch party at the Shrine Auditorium, knowing I was going to get backstage to meet the band, I decided to go with sort of signature Dave wear at the time, and I wore a wife-beater tank top. Can we still call them that, by the way? Is that inappropriate? It's my podcast. I don't care. But I don't think we can call them wife-beaters anymore. Anyways, that's what it was called back in the day. And a suit jacket. As a matter of fact, I have the picture right up here over my shoulder. And I remember, I'm not wearing a Depeche Mode T-shirt with the band, but I am going to try to dress like Dave. So are we trying to dress like the band members? So I know it's goofy, but I'm curious. I want to know. You getting dressed up? What are you doing? Dave's fashion on this tour has been a little bit different, right? Some people have pointed out that he's not taking off his shirt like he used to. And he also has seen, and I don't remember which show it was, but I was watching one of the concert videos, and Dave was wearing a dark long sleeve shirt, and honestly, it wasn't working. It was kind of all black, and it wasn't really working for me. I like the vests that he wears, and I think my friend Jeff, if I'm recalling correctly, he was wearing something very similar to that vest that Dave was wearing. So, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. What is your fast fashion that you're wearing to Depeche Mode shows? I am genuinely curious. All right, let's get to your listener feedback this week, and there is a lot of it and a lot of discussion to be had surrounding it. First comes from Eric Pickett, who writes, I'm thinking they maybe change the stage. I think the warm-up shows are to see the reaction. I saw a YouTube video where Anton Corbijn, their music video producer and concert set designer, was taking cell phone footage from the front row. My guess is taking visuals to see how the staging will change. Yeah, and again, I've been talking about this a lot. We won't know until May 16th whether or not the stage is going to change, but I'm genuinely curious if these were, as I mentioned last week, warm-up shows and that things will change after they've done these shows now, or if they were just warm-ups in the sense of these are just the first shows before the tour gets any longer. So we'll see. Thank you for the feedback. Michael Richard writes, I see my favorite stranger to get on the set list soon since they already rehearsed it in Munich. Clean would fit quite nicely, maybe as an alternative to an existing song. Black Celebration should replace Just Can't Get Enough in the encores. So my friend Jeff had turned me on to a post that somebody had written on Facebook. During one of the warm-up shows, a fan had a chance to talk with Peter Gordino, and according to the comment that was left, Peter said that they had intended on performing every song from the album at some point live. So, take that for what it's worth as it relates to what I mentioned last week with launching a campaign of hashtag more Memento Mori live and trying to encourage the band to perform more of the album live on tour. So perhaps now that we've had some distance, the album will have been out for well over a month. And we've all become familiar with it. When the tour kicks back off in, I believe it was Amsterdam, on May 16th, we will see more songs from Memento Mori be played live. Jennifer Lefevre writes, I agree, John. I would love to hear Before We Drown live. I saw them in March at the Kia Forum. It was magical, but absolutely needed more Memento Mori. My first experience with DM was the Rose Bowl show in '88, having missed a tour appearance in Southern California since. I'm jealous. Absolutely loving listening to your podcast. Thank you for giving devoted fans a place to share this incredible moment in time together. Let's keep the momentum going. Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. Mode Lee writes, of course they should play more from this great new album. People Are Good. Yes. Never Let Me Go. Before We Drown. The brilliant Always You would work very well, and it would be a great pleasure. I think they should trust the new stuff because it's mind-blowing. Simon Warboys writes, it really is a consistent listen. I've not stopped in finding playing it front to back and starting again. I said before that I love My Cosmos Is Mine and Speak to Me and how they bookend the album. It's a real journey. Yeah, and I mentioned this last week on the show that Speak to Me has been one that I've been really gravitating towards. And, as of late, this album has been speaking to me and once again has just proven to be poignant as I deal with life, the world we live in life in general, and especially My Cosmos is Mine. When it comes to my full-time job, I'll tell you what, going backwards is so fitting and so therapeutic when I go and listen to that. I am not going to get into all that on the show. Absolutely not. I like to keep it as bipartisan as possible, but having to cover the news of the day and going and listening to Going Backwards, that's a nice little way to sort of get some of my daily news consumption frustration out of my system. All right, friend of the show, Chad, writes, thanks for the shout-out. I could write you each week, but I refrain. Although my Nerd World the Depeche Mode podcast with John and Chad has a nice ring to it. In addition to that, I've also been listening to Memento Mori nonstop. It is a true masterpiece, and I'm loving it more each listen. Amazing how many layers of sound and the lyrics speak to me. 2, I'm pleased for the band that Memento Mori is getting positive reviews and Ghosts Again is getting airplay and is number 2 on the adult alternative chart. I'm a little surprised they didn't get higher on the U.S. album chart. I suspect when the Ghosts Again remixes come out, they will have a top 10 dance single too. Can't wait. Thanks as always, your pal Chad. Thank you, Chad. Yeah, and I'll keep saying it. Ghosts Again just has no burn for me. I absolutely love that song. Listening to it multiple times a day. David Hudson writes, my favorite stranger with an extended intro while the band enters the stage would be a great show opener, and they needed to play more up-tempo songs from Memento Mori. Lauren Toy writes, even on the Exciter tour, they played 8 songs from Exciter for the first leg and then 7 on the European leg. Yeah, I see comments like that, and again, I can't help but think that maybe it was just, and we'll know here in a couple of weeks, maybe it was just a matter of the band figured, well, no one's going to be familiar with the album, so we might as well go ahead and do this particular set list now, and then when we get to the other tour, the further into the tour, we'll play more from Memento Mori. Now, Wesley writes this, in my head, I like to think that I'm a big tough guy, but when I was at the Depeche Mode concert in San Antonio, I was proved otherwise. They opened up the show with My Cosmos Is Mine. Soon as the music hit, something took over me. I began to cry. I knew I was somewhere I belong. It's awesome. First, I was sad they didn't play many of the 80s songs, and they seemed to highlight the 90s music. That era has won me over now, too. The concert left me wanting more. I am a bigger fan than ever, and I'll probably see them twice on this tour. Keep up the great work. I'm a huge fan. Hashtag more Memento Mori live, Wesley. Thank you, Wesley. I appreciate that. By the way, if you're looking for something to supplement your time enjoying this album, apart from listening to more Depeche Mode, I would definitely encourage you, if you can find the copy of Pump Up the Volume, that's a great, just accompaniment in terms of themes of that movie and Depeche Mode. But on Amazon, I believe it's on Amazon now, Sing Street. If you haven't watched Sing Street, came out a couple of years ago. There's actually a Depeche Mode reference in that movie, but if you're looking for something and you're in a Depeche mood, you're in that era of music mood going back to the 80s and 90s, definitely go and watch Sing Street. It is a fantastic movie. And that last email I received reminded me of that because in the movie there's an exchange between the male and female protagonists of the story, and one of the comments that she makes, I believe they're talking about The Cure. She's talking about happy, sad music, and that fits nicely with what Dave said about Ghosts again, in his description of it. It really came down to it being happy, sad, and Depeche Mode, to me, makes happy, sad music. Larner Hughes writes, friend of the show, John, you are crazy and it works. This is such a great idea I'm in. I'd be ecstatic to hear the whole album, but would be just as happy with 2 more additional songs. If I could pick, it would be People Are Good and My Favorite Stranger. It would be epic to hear them live. Hashtag more Memento Mori live. Thank you for that. Just saw a tweet from Lerner here just a moment ago. Larner? I need to make sure I say that right. Probably need an accent. It's fun for me to find the Depeche Mode fans, obviously, but the Depeche Mode Star Wars fans. I probably don't mention it all that often, but the other podcast I do is a weekly Star Wars podcast, and so it's been really fun to see sort of these two different loves in my life cross each other. So that's a good time. I have seen the Depeche Mode Star Wars shirt where they take the band members and they make them look like characters from Star Wars. I'm not generally a fan of that type of mashup crossover. I kind of like my Star Wars pure, like my Depeche Mode pure. It kind of goes back to my thoughts about covers from Depeche Mode, even though I enjoy some of them. So that's not something that you would probably find me owning or wearing. So, all right, friend of the show, Stephanie writes, my relationship with Memento Mori. I listen to it even when I don't have the album on my ears. It's in my head and in my heart. It's unbelievable how important this band and all of a sudden this so hoped-for album is for me. It even comforts me over the loss of Fletch, who I still miss like a close friend. I've loved Depeche Mode longer than my husband, and they've been in my life longer. I know the feeling as it relates to my wife. And I can't really decide on a song, then suddenly a line from Before We Drown pops into my head, and at first I thought I didn't like the song. That's the magic of Depeche Mode, and yes, you can say magic, John. That's it from me, dear John. I hope you are well. I am. All the best from Germany, Baltic Sea Coast, Stephanie. Robert Palacios writes, I can't say I'm familiar with all the bands on the opening up on the European tour, but Cold Cave is absolutely amazing. Can't see any DM fan not liking them. Think Sisters of Mercy mixed with early OMD and New Order. All right, you sold me. I'll check that out. A bit more gothy than DM, but fantastic. Cherish the Light Years is a great place to start. Then Love Comes Close. I think you might like them. Love the podcast and Star Wars as well. Look at that. I wasn't even planning that. So I just went and listened to a bit of Cold Cave, and indeed, your description was pretty spot on. As a matter of fact, the lead singer sounded a little bit like Wire, to be honest with you. So I'll definitely be checking out more of Cold Cave in the future. All right, so I have a few more listener feedbacks that I want to share, but they're rather lengthy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold off on a few of these. So if you've written me recently, I will get to your emails. I definitely want to share with what you have had to share with me on the show. I want to wrap up on a friend of the show and my buddy Matt and his email to me in response to the bonus episode last week about sparking a campaign to get Depeche Mode to play more of Memento Mori live. Matt writes, Amigo, I love the hashtag More Memento Mori live campaign idea. Let's be honest, this is really just a thinly veiled attempt to get them to play Before We Drown, People Are Good, and Don't Say You Love Me for me, and Never Let Me Go for Matt, right? Brilliant. What about taking it to the next level? Here are some of my thoughts. What if we tied the campaign to a fan vote website? Maybe we put out a call to action. One of your devoted listeners surely has the capability or would love to create and host such a website with a fan vote capability. Maybe DM Live Wiki or Halo would do it. U2 did something like this years ago, but did it via social media before each night they were going to play. Posted 3 songs and let us fans vote. They then played the highest vote getter that night. It was pretty awesome. I'd also suggest that we include a non-Memento Mori category for a vote. You and I could select 10 songs that are not in the current set and are glaring omissions from their catalog and allow 1 vote per day for that category too. So, 2 categories, Memento Mori songs and non-Memento Mori songs. 1 vote for each category, 1 per day per registered email. And yes, I will register hundreds of Gmail accounts so I can stuff the ballot box for my favorite. I'm sure we could refine and improve, but that's my initial thought. It would be fun to create this thing. I bet it'd get a ton of traction. And there was a lot more details in this, but I wanted to give you the gist of what Matt was suggesting. I had wrote Matt back, and we text back quite often, and told them, I said, these are all great ideas. Unfortunately, given my full-time job and time doing my other podcasts, it doesn't really lend itself to, I don't really, a campaign of that being that comprehensive doesn't really lend itself for me to have enough time to go ahead and work out. But if anybody had any further suggestions, I would be more than willing to hear them. And as I said before, hopefully that fan rumor that was posted on Facebook from Peter Gordino is correct, and the band is planning on going and performing at least each song from the album one time on the tour. So it remains to be seen, but we'll see how that shakes out. In the meantime, again, I want to encourage you to use the hashtag More Memento Mori Live when talking about Depeche Mode online. And certainly, if you have any ideas based off of what Matt had suggested, I'm more than willing to hear them. I do have my website at mynerdworld.net where I could host such a thing, but again, I just don't personally have the time to get into something that comprehensive. But I appreciate the idea and the enthusiasm. And that wraps up this episode of Depeche Mode, the podcast. Again, if you've emailed and I did not get to your email on this show, I will on the next show. Before I let you go, I want to encourage you, if you haven't checked it out already, my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. If you want to support My Nerd World, you can head on over to mynerdworld.net or amazon.com if you're a sci-fi reader and check out a book set in the future. It's actually a series set in the future where space and flight culture has replaced car culture, inspired in part by Depeche Mode, life in the so-called space age, the world we live in, and life in general. Depeche Mode plays a large part in the underlying themes of the story. The main character himself is a massive Depeche Mode fan at a time when the music of the 80s through the 2000s is nostalgic and popular among the characters of the story, and it also features references to Depeche Mode, both direct and indirect, while telling an exciting science fiction space opera saga. If you like your science fiction to be epic, filled with some romance and action, EMBARK is perfect for you. Written for adults, but great for ages 11 plus. You can get the entire 7-book series available in ebook, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. Again, at Amazon.com under Jon, Jon Justice, or mynerdworld.net. All right, thank you so much for checking out the podcast again this week. I really do appreciate it. Back again soon. And again, if that single for Ghosts again drops, I'll be sure to put up a bonus episode. So if not, I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.